speaker, who is, I think it's Kieran.
Kieran, yeah.
Kieran McKinney, hi, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. So Kieran works for Age and Opportunity, and he manages the Engage program, who has to do with active citizenship, lifelong learning, and most relevant for us, he works in the field of age awareness and aging with confidence, so the topics we are dealing with today. So Kieran will talk about Ageism and awareness raising program in this field. So Kieran, the floor now is yours. And of course, as I think you have learned the method, we will have a Q&A session. So please, while Kieran presents, feel free to write down your questions. Please.
So hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here, and I've prepared just a small number of slides because I really don't intend speaking for very long. I think I'll speak for maybe 10 minutes. And what I'd really like to encourage is that we then have a group interaction. Is that okay? Because
sure.
I really believe that the purpose of a workshop is to deepen what we may have learned in other presentations and to share ideas. So to begin with, I'm going to start with a story. So in some point in my presentation, I'm going to refer to a study we carried out it was published in 2011, and it was called Visible Lives. But it was a study on the lives of older LGBT. And I'm saying that advisedly because in 2011, we didn't have sufficient awareness about the needs of intersex people. So it was LGBT, older people in Ireland. And we were finding it difficult to recruit into the study. Now, the age cohort was people who were 60 plus, and at the time I was 55, I think, 54, 55. And so I came up with the great idea of going to, we have this amazing film festival in Ireland called Gaze, G-A-Z-E, and it's an LGBTI wonderful film festival that takes place at the end of August during what is a bank holiday weekend here. So I said, let's go and let's see if we can recruit people there. So being conscious that, the minimum age was for people who were 60, I only approached people who I thought were at least 10 years older than me, at the very least. And I was going up to what I was regarding as, relatively older lesbian and gay men and trans people, and saying, oh, hello, we have this piece of research and wondering, would you like to take part in the study? And what was amazing for me was nobody was even slightly bothered about being identified as a lesbian, as a gay man, as a bisexual, as a transgender person. Nobody. There was no hint of any embarrassment about that. But lots of people were really offended that I thought that they were old enough to take part in the study. And it was a really significant learning for me because I've been involved well, it began for me as gay activism, but I've been involved in LGBT activism since the late 70s when I was at university. And I've basically spent most of my life working in the field. So although now I work in the field of older persons, for 25 years I worked in HIV service provision and worked with sex workers in London. So this has been a part and parcel of my life, and suddenly realizing that actually age and the connotations of age was a big factor for many people in our community, and people just resented being associated with the idea of being older. So that has really led me to develop a number of ideas about how we increase awareness of the LGBTI community in older age. And I think one of the most important things we still need to address is ageism. So, and if we don't address ageism, we're not going to actually address our own visibility as an LGBTI plus population. So I'm just going to share this now. Hang on, yes, let's just see. So are you able to see that screen?
Yes.
Good, thank you. So give me 1 second and I'll just go into slideshow. Okay, so I thought I'd have a little bit of fun, and why is this not responding? And thought, okay, the first thing to remember is that we're all hetero. Now, what do you think I meant by that?
So you can guess using the chat if you want.
So, I mean, clearly I'm being just a little bit provocative and wanting to literally have fun, because I think actually, I really also believe that the more important a topic is, the more important it is that we have fun while we are discussing or engaging with something. And
So
go on, Licia.
now that the first guess is heterosexual, what one participant asked, and the other one said because we are invisible.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So we're heterogeneous.
Yes.
So that it's a huge mistake. Now, obviously, I'm not teaching you this, but I think this is one of the messages we absolutely have to get out to society, that we are not a homogeneous population, that each of us is our own individuality, and that in fact possibly the only thing that many of us share can be the struggle to fully realize who we are and to become accepted. So we are united in some shared experiences. But for instance, people who took part in the Visible Lives study were about 5 or 6 years older than me, and when I was reading the life stories, I was kind of going, my God, these I don't actually link with this at all. I came out in the 70s. I've never had an issue about being out as a gay man. I had a very deep personal issue because I was also very committed Catholic, and I had to work myself on that for like 25 years, but I've never felt awkward or nervous about being out as a gay person in Ireland in the days when sex between men was still illegal. So, it's not right to just say we all had the same experiences, because we all didn't, and similarly it is with older age. So, so this is probably the key point I do want to address, which is that if we want to promote a better quality of life for older LGBTI people, then we absolutely have to identify and challenge ageism. Now, um, I think one of the absolute reasons that we still struggle with ageism is because it's different. It's not a hate crime. Like we have all these grounds of discrimination under European legislation. So we have race and ethnicity legislation, we have gender legislation, we have sexual orientation as a ground for discrimination, and we also have ageism as a ground of discrimination, as well as disability, as well as marital status, etc. But ageism is not the same as homophobia or racism. They are often experienced as hate crimes. And ageism is nothing like that whatsoever. But in fact, because it's so unlike that, very often it's under the radar, and very often we're just not that aware of it. But it is everywhere. And my concern is that just as many of us have been really concerned about, the whole danger of internalizing homophobia, how some of us when growing up can really, really struggle with accepting and loving who we are because of the external negative messaging. Well, in fact, it's the same with age. We can, if we internalize the negativity associated with age and aging, I think all what that does is we limit our expectations for our lives. Now, research absolutely demonstrates that if we have a low expectation for quality of life when we're older, guess what? That's what happens. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the opposite is also true. If we have high expectations for our quality of life, as we age and become older, get into older age, our experiences of life tend to be more positive. But I'd like us to consider a couple of things. Firstly, what age is old?
That was the first question that we received this morning. So you are talking about older persons, but who are these older persons, in fact? So it's an issue.
Absolutely, Licia. And so I used to work in HIV services, and this is like going back to the early 80s, and I was in London. And we were working with a local authority with this, and this man said, well, of course, we know that we don't have HIV in this part of town, but over there, we think there is some because it really only affects promiscuous people. Now, I hope you're all aware of the concept of promiscuity. So that led us to question, well, who is promiscuous? And of course, mostly the answer to that is, well, not me, but anybody who's more sexually active than me might be promiscuous, but I'm not. So it's a very, very loaded, subjective term, and in fact, it's useless as a way of understanding or describing behavior. And it's exactly the same as the word old, because we're all older or younger than somebody else. And for most of us, we regard as old somebody who's 20 years older than us, no matter what age we are. So now in my 60s, I regard old as probably somebody in their 90s. But when I was at college, I thought my parents were ancient and they were only in their 40s. So it's not a useful term at all, which is one of the reasons why we would always use that term older persons rather than old. But the other thing is, why is it that we generally, as a society at least, talk about aging only in the context of older age? From the day we're born, we're aging. Sorry, what was that? Did somebody?
No, I think it was just open
Okay.
mic. So
So if we're not aging, what are we?
changing, maybe.
No, if we're not aging, we're dead.
Oh, yes.
So, so I like to say to people, give your aging a big hug because it means we are alive and we're aging from day one. So a 14-year-old is aging as much as a 74-year-old. Our lives may be different because we've had different experiences. And of course, the aging experience at 14 can be or is often quite different to the aging experience at 74. But a lot of the societal messaging about older age is really linked to concepts of negativity and loss. And I don't believe that that should be the case. So, and by the way, I'm not kind of promoting some kind of hippie dippy, isn't it all wonderful? Of course, there are challenges as we get older. I was talking about this just recently with one of my friends and kind of going, you know, I'm fast becoming the older of the generation in my extended family. And most of the people older than me, my parents, my aunts and uncles, etc., they're all dead, nearly all of them. And so, you know, of course, as we get older, we often experience more loss than we did in young age. But it's not an exclusive experience. And so to depict all of us in this framework is really doing us a disservice. So it is wrong for us to treat all older people as though they are the same. And that message on the slide there is from the Being Me study, which was published last year. So this is a very, very relevant contemporary message that this is still the experience for many older people. The Being Me project was a specific study on older LGBTI folk in a number of European countries. And the website is just Being Me. I think it's beingme.com, but it has some really, really lovely resources. So I'd encourage you to check them out. So we are often portrayed, look, there's a load of negative words that are, generated about older people. Now, so clearly, what I'm describing here is stereotyping. Now, obviously, it's not just older people who are stereotyped. We also stereotype younger people. Younger people are often stereotyped as being perhaps unreliable or being noisy or sometimes even not caring, whereas anybody who's looked around at anything to do, even with environmentalism, would know that younger people are hugely concerned about the state of the planet, or indeed in many forms of activism, younger people are leading the way as well. So this is not to say that younger people don't get stereotyped either, but there does seem to be a much larger sense of stereotyping us as older persons. For instance, I don't think any of us would say that people who say from the age of 14 to 24 are the same. Certainly in commercial terms, nobody would dream of doing that because every one of those ages is like probably year by year is marketed to quite separately because people know that there are different age groups with, different, well, either fashion interests or indeed other interests. Whereas people often refer to anybody, I would say even from 50 plus, as the elderly and suggesting that people who are 50 are almost exactly the same as people who are in their 90s, when clearly we know that that can't be the case. But I think one of the really important concepts is that we are, as older people, and I'm not just talking about older LGBTI people here, I'm talking about older people in general, we are often regarded as either sexually inactive or uninterested in sex. Now that becomes an issue for many reasons, but I think it's a particular issue for us who belong to the LGBTI community because very often our sexual orientation is thought of in terms as something we do rather than something we are. So that's going to come up in the next slide. So this slide here showing, this description of us as being asexual can lead to this sense of double invisibility. And it was Eleni from the EU Commission, from the EC, who spoke about, the reality of becoming invisible as we get older. And I think it becomes a double invisibility for us as older LGBTI people. Uh, so, so if we perceive, particularly in terms of, let's just say, sexual orientation, so often there is this focus on, well, that's two men doing it with each other or two women doing it with each other. And a lot of the negativity is associated with the doing. Well, if we're then perceived as not doing it, are we then suddenly no longer gay or lesbian or bisexual? Now, obviously, I don't believe that, but what I'm suggesting is that there is a large, well, like a strong societal message that suggests that. And so, for instance, in residential care homes, um, pretty much everybody in a residential care home, certainly in Ireland, I believe, is regarded as being asexual. You don't get double beds in residential care homes, whether you're straight or LGBTI. And I think it's regarded as just something that doesn't have to be catered. And I think then there is the other layer of a sense of disgust at older people, perhaps wanting to be intimate with each other. Now, I remember like friends saying, can you imagine your parents doing it? And people will go, oh my God, no, I don't think about that. I don't think about that. Well, I think that just becomes exacerbated, that there's this whole sense of, firstly, often humor, not very good humor, I would suggest, but this whole idea that in fact we just don't get around to it, or we shouldn't be encouraged to do it. Now, and I'm not here just talking about sex, but I am talking about physical intimacy and emotional intimacy, and that very often people seem to think that that no longer has to be an issue as we get older. So, and in the Visible Lives study, excuse me, my voice is slightly hoarse. In the Visible Lives study, 1 in 5, 20% of the participants were anxious about revealing their LGBTI identity to health professionals. Now, I should point out that this particular cohort was not in the slightest bit representative of the general population on a number of counts. The extent to which people had been in higher education was phenomenal. So these were largely all, not exclusively, but largely, I'd say about 75% of the people in the study had qualified in some kind of profession. And they were extremely IT literate in comparison to the rest of the general population of older people as well. And yet, even in this instance, 20% were of revealing their LGBT identity, and that 2/3 felt that healthcare professionals don't have enough knowledge about LGBT issues. So that's clearly a training issue as well as an awareness issue. But I would like to suggest that many healthcare professionals don't have enough understanding about sexuality and sexual orientation anyway. But I'm going to go back to sexuality, that many healthcare professionals fail to understand that our sexuality continues with us as we get older. Of course, it might change. I was saying to one of my friends, I haven't had sex with anybody since March because I'm single. And with COVID, I haven't been meeting anybody. And I was saying, I'm just so glad I'm in my 60s, because if I were in my 30s and 40s, I would probably be crawling the walls, because I recognize that my sexual desire has changed. It's not gone, it's just different. But these days, it's not the kind of driving force that it used to be when I was a younger man. So, and Professor Raj referenced intersectionality in his talk at the beginning of the conference this morning. And I would like to reiterate that I really believe that one of the things we absolutely have to grasp and promote is this concept of intersectionality. So not only am I still a gay man, but I'm now an older gay man, which brings with it a number of issues. Not necessarily all negative, but I am conscious that I myself have changed. But I think one of the things that I won't allow happen is, and this is what very often happens to us as we get older, that the interpretation of us as being an older person becomes the key thing that we're identified as, and it can overshadow everything else. So, and I like to tell this story. With my last relationship, he was a toy boy. He was only in his mid-50s, so he was like 5 years younger than me. So I used to joke and call him my toy boy, but he had come out later in life, so he was still mad keen about going clubbing on the gay scene. And I was going, cool, we can go clubbing. And my thing was, I might decide I'm no longer that interested in clubbing, but don't you dare tell me I can't go clubbing because I'm an older man. And that's really one of the things that we have to remember. This is about choosing, it's about choice, and it's about being in control of how we are perceived and ultimately how we're treated. And I think Ashton Applewhite, who, if you don't know her, she is an amazing speaker on age and age issues. Just Google her or go onto YouTube. There's any number of like TED Talks, etc., that she's given. But she makes this point: as layers of oppression can solidify and become more and more difficult to challenge, so too can we create the other layers. We can create layers of support, layers of advocacy and education. And so let's not forget that we as a population, as individuals and with colleagues, we can challenge all of that, and we can create a better and more inclusive society. So I'm going to stop the share. And I hope that was interesting. I hope it was useful. But now, really, we have 15 minutes. So let's just throw it open to the floor. Or Licia, I can now see the chat, but I wasn't able to see it earlier.
Yeah, no worries. I monitored that. Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, because I think it was very inspiring, and it made me think about two issues maybe I would like you to comment about. The first one is that when we talk about ageism, often we say that it's one of the reasons why it's so widespread is also because while we have always been younger, we have experienced being younger, so it's easier to identify with younger persons. We have never experienced being older, so that's one of the challenges. So what do you think about that?
So I think two things. One is today I'm older than I was yesterday. And that applies to every one of us, no matter what age we are. So, and I'm not being glib. I will talk to the point directly in a second. But I think we need to remember that every one of us is older than we once were. You know, so that, and older becomes a foreign country if we only think about it as being it begins at 60 or it begins at 70. You know, so older is something that we are all experiencing if we're lucky enough. These days, of course, you know, many of us, particularly in Europe, you know, if we reach the traditional, say, retirement age of 65, well, certainly in Ireland, it's now at 66. You know, most of us can expect to live for another 20 years. Now, that was unheard of even just 30 years ago. I'm already older than my father was when he died 25 years ago. And when he died, I mean, you know, people were saying, "Oh, it's sad and stuff," but nobody was saying, "God, he's very young." Like he was, I think, 58, you know, when he died. But like, I don't remember anybody saying, "Gosh," because like men often died at that age. You know, like many of us lost our dads in particular, like, you know, often earlier than we should have, and a lot of that was to do with, I guess, lifestyle. My father was a heavy smoker, etc. So there's that. But I think just as we can say, yes, we've experienced youth and we can perhaps, you know, of course it's beautiful. Like it's wonderful to have those memories and stuff. But actually, you know, if I was offered a pill and told I could go back to being 25, I wouldn't want to do it. Because when I'm truthful about being 25, while I was having a great time, I was also like I had a huge degree of anxiety about who I was, where I was, and how I fitted into society. And literally, you know, do people like me? Will people approve of me? So, do you know what is the age at which people are happiest throughout Europe? Guess. Throw out, go on, unmute yourselves. Just,
60, someone is writing here.
okay, 60.
65.
Any other takes?
I would say maybe their
Somebody
present
said their
age,
present age.
someone,
Okay, but
yeah.
I want you to name an age. Go on.
55.
Okay.
Any other guess? I would say maybe retirement age, so 65. Someone is saying 70.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
that
so
person is right. So there was a European-wide study, and it showed that people at 70 were the ones who were reporting the highest levels of self-satisfaction with their lives and quality of lives. The Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging recently published data which shows that, in fact, our sense at which we are happiest kicks in from about 65 and remains until just, I think it's 75, 76, 77. Then
yeah.
it begins to reduce a bit because quite often it's because at that stage it may well be that, you know, physical ill health might become slightly more prevalent.
Exactly.
So you know, for many of us that's still something to look forward to, you know,
Yeah,
and I think that that's a message we should be promoting as well. but
exactly.
but also, and I'm really glad that, you know, mindfulness has become, you know, a much more common phrase. Rather than just looking forward to when I'm going to be older, why don't we just enjoy what we are now? Dahi, that's a good question. Why is Tilda so poor? Honestly, I don't know, but they have started including it now in their studies. But you're
And
right.
can you share with us what tilde is? Because I think
Tilda. So
it's something Irish,
it's
maybe we don't
the
know.
Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging.
Okay, thanks.
And they've been reporting now for about 15 years, I think. So it's a very large, long-term study, and Dahi is right. They haven't been inclusive of LGBTI issues, but they are getting there, and I think it's up to us to insist that they become more inclusive, and it is up to all of us to, you know, to raise that as an issue and remind people that this is an important. So I'll tell you another story. I was as ILGA Europe, when I used to work at the Gay and Lesbian Equality Network, and ILGA Europe asked me to go to when Portugal had the presidency in 2006, I think, asked me to go to a social inclusion conference. So there I was walking around with, my ILGA Europe badge, and people saying to me, why is ILGA at a social inclusion conference? And I was kind of going, well, LGBTI people, experience social exclusion and often experience material and financial poverty. And one of the responses was, don't be silly. You're all the richest people in town. You're all the couple, double income, no kids. You live in the best parts of town, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember laughing and thinking, well, that is obviously a stereotype, but it's a very different stereotype to the one that I grew up with in the 70s, and which was that gay men were lonely creatures. And whereas now the other stereotype was, well, we're these kind of flamboyant, well-off, successful creatures. Now, neither is true, of course, but at least it's a slightly more positive outlook. But somebody else from the development world said to me that actually your sexual orientation is a luxury and it's a product of coming from a developed country.
Yeah, and that's a point raising a question about the geographical differences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, at the time, I said, yes, I think you're right. And in fact, it took me a number of years further to now, I would say, no, my sexual orientation is as integral a part of me as anything else. And it is part of my human rights as a person. But I'll admit, having worked in the field for 20 years, suddenly somebody was able to tell me that it was a luxury, because in fact, if you're facing food scarcity, or if you're facing war, etc., they're more important. And I don't think anything is more or less important. They're all
Indeed.
part of our holistic experience as people. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran, and thanks everyone for participating to the discussion. We have a few minutes left, and we agreed that we would have left the floor to another guest, which was not in the program, but we are happy to leave the floor for a few minutes to Maria Laura Annibali. Maria Laura is an activist, documentarist. She is the president of a LGBTI organization in Rome. So she would like to share some of her work with us, and I think she will do it with the help of Roberto. So Roberto, you can open your microphone for the translation. So Maria Laura and Roberto, the floor is yours.
Grazie, eccoci qua. Io devo fare solo dei ringraziamenti e degli auguri molto grandi, molto, molto sentiti a tutta la comunità, perché avremo un anno ancora forse difficile, qui in Italia forse anche di più, per i diritti civili. Comunque, noi siamo abituati a combattere e quindi combatteremo. Un saluto grandissimo, un ringraziamento, un bellissimo progetto e buon anno a tutti. E il resto lo lascio a Roberto, il mio braccio destro e sinistro. Grazie, grazie comunque, sempre.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate to this meeting. Sorry, my very bad and poor English. Maria Laura is very happy, and she you speak to make you very thanks and wishes for all the activity of European LGBTQI Association. Laura and me, I think it's very important to create contacts and links to coordinate the initiative and the common fights for the defense of rights and against any form of discrimination based on the sex or sexual orientation. On the post of Maria Laura, more information about her and her association, the Gay Project in Rome. Thank you very much. And sorry.
Thank you, Roberto and Laura. I have copy-pasted here in the chat the link to the Facebook page of the association. So in case you want to get in touch, and also if you are a member of the Facebook group of the Best4Older, or if not, please join the group, the Facebook group. We have also posted a video about an experience of co-housing in Rome, where Maria Laura is also she's part of this program. In the video you can see her. It's subtitled in English, so accessible to everyone. And so I encourage you to watch the video and also to get in touch, as Roberto said, to strengthen the networking opportunities. So,
sorry.
Yes, sure.
Maria Laura is also a filmmaker, and your next project is a documentary about the older people, LGBTQI, especially people is not sorry, is people especially far to spotlight, but is very in the past their contribution is very important to develop the right LGBTQI people.
Indeed, and there is a last comment, and then we have 50 seconds before we go back to the main room. But Deiti is asking whether he can join you in a co-housing in Rome, because he would very much like to spend his last years in Rome with you. So maybe it's a good chance to get in touch.